Welcome to the Beth Yeshua podcast. For more episodes like this, visit bethyeshua.org/media. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Beth Yeshua podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Josh Rubenstein, and today I'm here with Shari Rubenstein. Hi, Mom.
Hi. Greetings to all.
And today we're also here with Paul and Carol Chrisman. Hi, Chrismans.
Hello.
Hello.
And today we are really wanting to just hear their history, hear their story, and really get to know them. The Chrismans are members of Beth Yeshua, and they've been part of our community for some time. And we really want to hear their voice as an intermarried couple and what it's like within Messianic Judaism and how they got there. As always, if you're interested in hearing us and seeing us, you can go to the YouTube, or you can check us out at bethyeshua.org. And I think if you search on YouTube, it's bethyeshua.sac or Beth Yeshua SAC, SAC for Sacramento, because that's where we're at. So Paul and Carol, I guess I'll ask which of you would kind of want to go first. What I'd love to hear Carol's like, oh, it's definitely Paul. She's like, yeah. And so Paul, what I'd love for you to share is really maybe a bit of your history, maybe how you grew up a little bit, how you ended up with faith in Yeshua as the Messiah. Maybe even how you and Carol found each other, and then maybe at that point we could back up, and Carol, you could share a little bit of your history up to that point, and then you guys could talk about what your following of God has looked like, how you ended up in Messianic Judaism, maybe how you ended up at Beth Yeshua. So Paul, we'll go to you first, since you were volunteered first.
For the role, but
You're it.
I grew up in a believing family. I'm a Gentile. We were a family of Gentile Christians in the Sacramento area. My parents had long been involved with a Messianic organization called Friends of Israel. And so from an early age, that was part of my life. My parents actually in 1975 moved to Israel when I was 12 years old, and I went with them and lived there for 5 years with them. And that was a formative time of my life, growing up there in Jerusalem. We attended a Messianic assembly. They didn't refer to themselves as a synagogue, and their services are not oriented as much towards a synagogue service as ours are.
Sure.
But nevertheless, a Jewish Messianic assembly of believers in Yeshua. And so for 5 years, that was where we worshiped. I ended up, how to say that, I broke my neck in Jerusalem and was in the hospital for 5 months, completely paralyzed at first. And thankfully God gave me back most of my function, but not all of it. My shoulders and upper arms never recovered. During that time, though, when I was helpless in the hospital, our Messianic Assembly organized a group of people to come and sit with me 24/7 in the hospital.
Wow.
Wonderful.
24 hours a day, I had somebody by my bedside because I was not able to speak above a whisper or to push a button for the nurse or anything like that. I just was completely helpless. And that was quite a testimony to the people in the hospital, that this kid had all these people willing to spend so much time just sitting there and being available. It made a big impression on my life. But at the end of my time in Israel, I was graduating from high school, and so I was looking towards coming back to the United States and going to college. And my passion at the time was was physics, mathematics, perhaps engineering.
Okay.
I couldn't get into engineering because of the continuing disability with my arms. That was one thing that was a barrier. So
Sure.
I went into the theoretical areas of physics and mathematics and got my degree in that area. But the problem was, unless I got a doctorate, I wasn't going to be able to do much with that. And so I thought, well, how hard could law school be?
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I love it.
And I tell this as the story of my broken neck as part of the reason that I went to law school, because of the disabilities that I had. I don't imagine that I ever would have done that otherwise.
Yeah.
But I did. And that was leading up to how we met. We met in law school. I was a year ahead of Carol, and in my second year, I went to a meeting of the Christian Legal Society at UC Davis. And I noticed this new woman sitting across from me, looked like she had something wrong with her eye. She was
Smart aleck.
It was a little winky, was it?
Oh
yeah,
my,
I
oh
couldn't figure out
my.
what was going on, but we became fast. We became fast friends almost immediately. I don't.
You're not going to tell him why about the joke.
No,
I guess
don't.
you are
Come
now.
on. Oh, come on. Well, now.
You are
Some
now.
things
Some
don't
things
make the
don't.
podcast.
We'll
no,
save that
there's-
for off camera. We'll
Off
save
camera. Yeah.
There's very few people in my life that I have taken an instant liking to, and Carol is one of them. One of the very few. And so we were friends for a good 5 years before I ever asked her out on a date, really, as a date. And then the rest is history. We've been together for 32 years now, a little more.
Praise God.
And when I came back here, I started attending regular churches in the area again. And it wasn't until, well, I'll let Carol tell that part of the story, but how we became involved with Beth Yeshua. So you want to?
Okay. So, Carol, do you mind kind of taking us back to maybe your childhood, how you grew up, and then take us up to there?
I grew up on a cattle ranch in eastern Oregon. And so that's a very rural, conservative area. And my parents brought us up pretty secularly. We did celebrate Christmas. But when I was in about, I don't know, third grade maybe, we had a family meeting. And we all sat around the table. And the family meeting was for the purpose of my parents telling us that we should never tell anybody we were Jewish.
Whoa.
And I didn't know what a Jew was, because there isn't a synagogue within probably, I don't know, 300 or 400 miles of where I'm from. And so it was kind of like, well, whatever that is, I guess I won't tell anybody. And I kind of forgot about that. We grew up, we moved at some point to Arizona. And
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
How did a Jewish family end up like as cattle ranchers, like way out in the middle of nowhere?
Well,
Like-
my dad is the Jew,
Okay.
and my mom was the governor's daughter, which I think has to do, or a governor's daughter, with why marrying a Jew probably wasn't too acceptable. But
Okay.
at any rate, my grandfather, depending on who you ask, either got the ranch as a settlement. He was a lawyer before, and he became governor when I think the current governor died or something. Anyway, it was a long, long time ago. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so he got the ranch as part of the settlement, or as the lawyer's fee. So my dad was a World War II veteran, which may have also had something to do with not wanting people to know we were Jewish as well.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And so my granddad, when he got out of the service, I think he needed a job and something to do. And so my grandfather packed them up and gave them the opportunity to learn how to be farmers. My dad was raised in Portland, Oregon, and knew nothing about farming. In fact, his training was driving the bread truck and helping deliver bread during the Depression for the Jewish grandparents.
Wow.
So his background was not in farming. No, and my mother's was certainly not in farming. So anyway, they took over.
So they took over a ranch like you
They took
do.
over a ranch, and we all learned to ride horses and move cows and change sprinkler pipe and, you know, all that good farming stuff. So that's how he got
Okay,
there.
got it. All right. So then you moved to Arizona.
So I moved to Arizona, and that was a pretty big change because there were 700 people in the town that I grew up in. So you moved to Phoenix, Scottsdale,
Wow.
Arizona area. It's a pretty big change. Anyway, my parents had lots of issues, and they eventually separated, etc. But while I was in high school, this girl that was in my class invited me to go to church. And I thought, well, okay, whatever. So I went. And I went with her, and my family, as I said, was kind of in disarray at the time.
Sure.
So I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. These people are nice, and they're friendly, and they all seem pretty happy with their lives, which I was not at the time. And so I went a few times, and with them, they'd come and get me and take me. And then I started going to a Bible study with her. And I remember the topic it was a home Bible study with teenagers, right? We sang, I learned how to sing Amazing Grace to House of the Rising Sun.
I want to hear that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So, and I remember that was the first time I had heard about the second coming of Christ. Well, I didn't know about the first coming, much less the second coming. And I remember thinking, and they were going over something called the 4 spiritual laws.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, it was, and they were all involved in Campus Crusade, right?
Yep.
And so I remember all this, it was like, wow, what is all of this? And at some point, one of the leaders sat down and shared this 4 spiritual laws little booklet. And, I started to cry, and I became a believer in Yeshua at that time.
I'm wondering really quick to interrupt, sorry. I'm wondering if a lot of Jewish people struggle with that moment, right? Of like putting their faith in Yeshua because there's a high cost, especially in family relationships. But it sounds like maybe there wasn't going to be for
Well,
you.
my mother was very upset because
Oh.
these were Jesus freaks, right?
Right.
And so she was very upset. My dad was kind of out of the picture at that time. He had moved on with a friend. And so she was very upset and unhappy and took us to a Methodist church because they were more socially acceptable. But, and this was a very small New Testament church kind of thing.
Right.
And very much involved in the Jesus movement, and that just was not socially acceptable. So that's kind of interesting.
That is interesting that it's basically backwards than a lot of people.
Yeah. I think my dad probably thought, oh, good, at least she's not smoking pot and skipping school like, maybe she might have been doing.
She'll make something of her life.
He
Yeah.
might do something. He wasn't really too upset about it. I don't know that I even told him at that time.
Sure.
So then at some point when the marriage broke up, my mom decided to move back to Oregon. And so we packed up and moved back to Oregon. Well, that was kind of, it's hard. If people know you in your prior life and your family's not really supportive, it's not an excuse. It's not very easy to go forward with your faith. I went to a Baptist church, but here you are, this 16, 17-year-old kid in a church, and everybody knew my family, so it was kind of like, wow. It's kind of funny. One of the people we used to drive cattle with was a believer, And he used to help our family a lot with cattle drives. And I remember we all thought he was a big weirdo because he never swore at the cows. He would say, "Go yonder, cows," right? And we were like, blah, 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 beep, 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 blah, 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 because that's how we grew up, right? And one time I remember we lost our lunches, and he offered us his lunch. I thought, I'm not taking a sandwich from this guy. He's just weird, And so I wouldn't take a sandwich. And
These are just so you get the picture. You were probably what?
I was
7 or 8 at the time.
Right, we were wild.
These are little kids that swore like sailors.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
Rode horses, and we were pretty wild girls.
Yeah.
Shot BB guns and real guns and whatever. But
Annie Oakley over
Annie
here.
Oakley kind of
Yeah.
kid. So
Well, wait 1 second, Carol. You say we. You have one sister.
I
You
have two sisters. One
right.
sister's deceased. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So he was pretty, and I remember he was so kind to me when he found out I'd become a believer, and he and his wife were very excited, and finally it's like, oh, that's why he was so weird, and why it was, anyway, that's kind of an aside.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So and then when I was in high school, I went to live with another family because I had issues with my mother and blah, blah, blah. We don't have to get into all that. But anyway, I went to live with
No,
another.
but I think it's important to say that because so many teenage girls do not get along with their parents, especially their mothers.
Well,
It's good to bring it up.
okay.
You can
well,
survive it.
You can survive it. She, at some point, decided, I think that I was a little out of control and had kind of lost my way and went back to skipping school and et cetera. So she just kind of, I think, was done as a parent. She'd raised, I was the youngest, and she was just over it. So about a mile from our house were some people I grew up with. They were our neighbors. I'd been, so I went and lived with them for my junior and senior year.
Really?
And regained some stability and kind of got my life back on track, and I did really well in school, and I didn't have a plan for college, and the bus driver was a believer at one of the little Baptist churches that I had attended from time to time, and he and his wife kind of took me in and said, "Have you done the ACT or the SAT?" No.
Yeah.
So when their son went over to about 100 miles away to take the test, they took me over there, and then they talked to me about college. And it was actually my middle sister and her husband who talked me into going to Seattle Pacific, which is a Christian college in Seattle. So I went there for college.
Was your trajectory law like the whole
No,
time?
I was a psychology major in college. Actually went to graduate school at the University of Oregon, and I have a master's degree in counseling. And I went back to Oregon and worked in community mental health for 7 years. And the interesting thing about there, and I joined a Baptist church, and all that was good, got involved, but I never fit in. And I always thought I didn't fit in because I was single at the time, because I grew up in a non-believing home. There are lots of reasons you think about why you don't fit in, but
Right.
I just never fit in. At some point, I realized there were no men in the Wallowa County. I hope this doesn't go public. That I didn't know from DUI school or from mental health. And I knew why all the men were single because, I worked at the mental health clinic and did the DUI program, which is driving under the influence, right? The alcohol program. So first I started I thought, well, maybe I'll go to medical school. And so I took chemistry, and I am an absolute failure at math. So I went to law school because it has no math on the law school admission test.
That's awesome.
And so that's why I went to law school. And my side of that story is I went to law school, and there was this cute young man in Christian Legal Society. And my faith, I've not been the most consistent, but once you become a believer, I think God never really ever lets you go.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, you wind your way around and find. Anyway, I found myself in Christian Legal Society, and there was this cute little guy in the program, but I thought he was way too young, right? He was just a little whippersnapper. But anyway, we did become fast friends. And one of the ironies is there was this guy in my class who was always trying to set him up with some other girl, right? And it's like, what is your deal?
Stop it. He's mine. What are you doing?
I didn't even realize that I cared about him in that particular way because we were just friends, right? But anyway, we eventually figured out that we were pretty well suited, started dating, got married. And I don't know how many years we wanted to go to Israel. Paul wanted to, and I didn't have any particulars. But one of the things, my dad lived with me my second or third year of law school and became quite ill. And I remember when he was in the hospital, he wanted to talk to a rabbi or a minister. And I remember thinking, well, what does he want to talk to a rabbi for? Because I'd kind of forgotten the whole Jewish thing.
Right.
And so he taught, I don't know if he ever did. I thought, well, I'll sign him up on the thing when he was in the hospital. And he also at one point had met a Christian woman, and they had quite a significant relationship. And that's kind of a funny story on as an aside. But at any rate, he lived with me. And he would always say these funny things like, I am by nature your stereotypic Jewish woman. And,
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I can't help it. I've always been that way. And he would say things to me like, someday you'll understand why you are the way you are. And I thought, well, whatever, who knows what that means, right? Wow. And he was quite the character. We won't go into too many stories, but there's a lot of stories. But anyway, he's quite the character. And so Paul and I decided to go to Israel. And we were telling him by now was he in assisted living then, or was he in the apartment? They were in the apartment. And so we told him we were going to be gone. We were going to Israel. And he says, well, you're finally going to meet your people. And you'll find out, why you are the way you are.
Wow.
Interesting.
Now, how far along in law school was this?
This was after we'd been married.
Oh, we'd been married 20 some odd years.
Oh,
really?
So you guys are like practicing your living life.
Church. Paul was the chairman of the elder board.
So was the church taking a trip to Israel?
No, Paul just wanted to go.
Okay. Is that because of your childhood and wondering?
We just went ourselves.
Yeah.
Paul just wanted to go.
Okay.
And so then he starts telling all these stories about growing up with, and he had lived quite a bit of his life with his Orthodox Jewish grandparents. Wow. And during the Depression. And one of the funny stories he would tell was about Passover. He was in charge of keeping the mackerel in the bathtub and feeding them.
Oh, Lord.
But not really being raised Jewish, not having practiced it, he didn't know you didn't feed leavened bread. So in the middle of the Depression, he feeds the mackerel leavened bread. Well, of course, they had to kill all the mackerel and start over.
Oh, my. In the Depression, too. Oh, my goodness.
My.
During the Depression. And, so that was, and my great-grandmother was very Orthodox. She kept totally a kosher kitchen, everything separate. And what was funny, so anyway, so all of a sudden I'm like, well, I can't be Jewish because I'm a Christian, right?
Right.
And one of the things I had learned at the church that I became a believer in was everything you were in your past, which was lucky, is forgiven and gone, and you're a new creation in Christ.
Right.
So, and one of the things they say is whatever you were, whether you were Catholic, whether you were Jewish, whether you were Muslim, whatever it is you were in the past, you are no longer. You're a believer.
Wow.
And one of the things Paul and I did when we got married was we had this, let's just lay our cards on the table. If there's anything in your family you need to say, or do you have a criminal history? Do you owe debt money? Let's put on. And I remember thinking, I wonder if I should tell him I'm Jewish. Remember we did that? And we won't get into all of it. But
that's a pretty interesting thing to do.
Wow.
That's really, I should have, I do premarital
I remember your
counseling.
mother was concerned that I might be.
And my mother, in fact, she took me aside after the wedding, and she sees all these menorahs and says, "I hope you didn't make the same mistake I made, aka marrying a Jewish man," because she thought he was Jewish because of all their Israeli stuff.
Wow.
But I remember thinking, well, I wonder if I should. And then I thought, well, no, because I'm not Jewish anymore, so I don't need to disclose that.
It's in the past.
Interesting.
That false dichotomy in theology was there for so long.
Yeah. So I had no idea that, and I remember, and so we went. So when my dad was saying, it was like, well, okay. And I remember I said, well, I believe in Jesus. At one point he and I were talking about the whole Jewish thing, and he said, well, but it's in your DNA.
Right.
And I remember thinking, well, that's interesting. I don't know. So we go to Israel. We meet these lovely people, the nurse that took care of Paul, all these Messianic people. And it's like, well, okay, so they're Jewish, but they're practicing Christians. I don't know. Well, that's kind of weird.
Yeah. What is that?
What is that? And I thought, well, I don't know. What is that? But one of the interesting things, was it before we went that I took the Hebrew class? When did we start? Was that before we went the first time or the second time?
I don't recall.
I can't remember. But anyway, of course, then you go, and I don't know if you've had this, but you go to Israel, and it does something in your heart and in your soul. And you just feel like you're home. These people are like me, right? They are my people. And
I knew she would fit in within 10 minutes after arriving at Ben Gurion Airport, because we stopped to change dollars into shekels at the bank in the airport. And we're standing in line. And in Israel, there are no lines, right?
Yep.
So,
There's just elbows.
got in front of her, she threw an elbow and got him to get back. And the woman behind her says, "Yeah, you go, girl." And so I knew she'd fit right in.
Yeah. Got to have some sharp elbows.
you got to, that pushy Jewish woman thing comes in handy. So anyway, and I can't remember. I think one of our first guides was a young woman, and either her husband or somebody was a lawyer, and we got to talking about Aliyah. And Paul was teaching a Bible study, and is it Isaiah that talks about the return, or Ezekiel? I can't remember.
Well, they all do.
They all do.
Yeah, right.
Ezekiel that says, "I will not leave any of them among the nations anymore."
I remember when he talked about that, I felt teary, and I just felt like, that's something that we should consider.
Right.
I don't know why. So then at some point we signed up for the Hebrew class. I did that Shai taught. I guess because I was thinking seriously about Aliyah.
Yeah.
And so BY sponsored that. I didn't know anything about BY I was still kind of, we were still members of a Christian church. Paul, I don't know if you were still the elder board or whatever, but so we took the class, and I really don't know. I took several classes, and I really don't know why we decided to try going to the service, but it was down on G Street. Do you remember what brought us to this?
Well, we were looking for a new place.
Well, that's right. Yeah. Okay, I forgot that part. Yeah. There were some. Yeah, we won't go into that.
Sure,
but anyway, sometimes the new modern church, the music is so loud that my ears can't take it. But at any rate, so we were looking, and so I don't know, I think we saw the website, and I was taking classes that were sponsored, and it's like, well, let's just try this out. I don't really remember, and so we went on G Street. And
When would that have been, Carol? I'm trying to remember.
I don't.
When Shai was teaching the Hebrew class.
Yeah, when he was teaching the Hebrew, right.
Probably late 2017.
Okay, because we've been where we are now 7 years? No. We moved there when Ellie was 12.
It's close, yeah. It's close to
Yeah.
7 years.
So, and we were only, I think, 3 years at that place in Midtown.
It was
Right.
in, yeah,
It was in Midtown,
it
right?
was in Midtown, because
Okay.
that's where the Hebrew classes
Right.
were.
Correct.
And then we started going, and I just, remember trying to think through what, okay, maybe, so I'm still Jewish,
Right.
but I'm a Christian, and what does that really mean? And what is it to be Jewish? And so I started reading some books about being Jewish, and oops, the dog wants to get involved here.
Of course. Yes.
And it's sort of been, and Paul has always been.
All right, okay.
That's amazing. I love it.
What's the dog's name? We should know the dog's
Yeah,
name.
what's the doggy's name?
This is Sunday. Sunday
Sunday.
the dog. And she doesn't really like it if we're not paying attention to her. So what can I tell
Like
you?
every other dog, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
go away.
So
Anyway.
I'm actually kind of curious, Carol. Like, it sounds to me, I know that sometimes I actually feel a little bit teary-eyed when the Holy Spirit is at work, like doing something in my heart. I can't really articulate it in words. It's a feeling of emotion, and it's kind of like, hey, you need to pay attention. You need to lean in here. There's something here. And it does sometimes take a while to wrestle through and figure out what that is. And I'm curious, like you said, I was asking myself, like, what does it mean to be a Jew? And so I'm curious, like, well, what was the answer to that? What was the answer to that in your life? And like, you're probably still on the journey, but I'm just wondering, like, as you started really exploring that, what was it that you felt was like, these are the things that I need to wrestle with or do or observe now that I'm really embracing who I am as a Jew?
Well, I think it's a process, and I think that for the first time I really understood how the Old Testament and the New Testament come together, right? To make a complete understanding of Yeshua and the Messiah and God's plan from beginning to end, which I knew nothing, almost nothing about the Old Testament or the Torah. And so part of it was kind of an opening of my mind to the Torah and the Old Testament and the festivals and the holidays, and understanding how those things were constantly there to bring people to God and to foretell about the coming Messiah. And before, they're just holidays. I used to gripe from time to time early in my career about those mixed marriage people who got Christmas and Hanukkah and Passover and
Easter.
Kippur and they all got all the freaking holidays, right?
Yeah.
And all the rest of us had to work during those days because all those people were taking all those holidays. Anyway.
Right, yeah.
But for me, I think one of the, get down. And one of the, I think you talk about the Holy Spirit. When I went to BY and I heard, okay, that is really, you're going to have to edit this video.
Yeah, no worries. Oh my gosh. I don't know. I might leave it in.
I
This
love
is
it.
awesome.
I love it.
This is great.
This is real. This is just
Sunday-
a conversation in
Sunday
your living
wanted
room.
to be involved. I
She just
love it.
has to be part of everything. But hearing the blessings and the Torah service did bring tears to me the first time. And I think part of that is that somewhere, and the dancing, somehow I know how to do the hora. and I
Right.
know some of the blessings. And I think we visited my great grandmother in her nursing home, and I think it must have been either a Jewish home or she taught them to me, because I knew some of the blessings, like for the food, for the wine. I didn't know the words, but it was like something. I don't know. I can't hardly explain it. It just touches your heart. So now I've lost track of my train of thought. So what I think part of it is understanding. I'd never read the Bible thinking about being Jewish and what that meant. Did it mean anything? What is the difference? What is your calling that's different or the same as anybody else? Are there differences in how you live your life? I don't know that it's,
And what do you think about those questions?
Yeah.
Well, when I when I have to volunteer to do something I don't really want to do, I think, oh, I'm doing a mitzvah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right. There you go.
And I
And it
do
does.
try to celebrate the festivals and the holidays. The food situation, I wasn't raised Jewish, so our family ate a lot of pork. And I think that's, sometimes I think, we try to be very respectful of other people and their views, but, we serve ham at Christmas. And that's traditional in most families. And there's verses in the New Testament about, it's not a matter of what you eat or what you do. It's whether I think God has led you to, for one person it's sin and for somebody else it's not.
Right.
So there are some of those kinds of things that I'm still up in the air about, honestly. I don't know. I don't necessarily feel, to me, those are not as critical for me as some of the things like the fruits of the Spirit. Do I display the fruits of the Spirit? Do I walk the walk and talk the talk, or does my old sailor mouth hillbilly ranch girl come out and she's still pretty active from time to time?
Right.
So it's kind of like I try to, I keep some of those things, and I think, as a Jew, what are you called to do? What are you required to do that's different? And I'm still kind of working through some of those things and trying to figure out what is the same and what is different. I love the Torah service at BY and all of those kinds of things. They speak to me, and I love the recitation of the Shema and the Vahavta, and but I also don't want to forget the work that the Messiah came to do, right? The birth, the death, the resurrection, and the coming again. And so it's a process.
It is. And I think it's like so many other things in our lives. It's good for us to be slow and deliberate. I think we, by nature, humans, we are like pendulums. We like to swing kind of back and forth and overcorrect from thing to thing, right? And always when I'm counseling intermarried couples, as they're beginning to think about how are we going to set up our home and what are we going to, what will be the physical observances? Are we going to light candles on a Friday night? Are we going to go to a Shabbat service? Are we going to have our kids circumcised? Are we going to celebrate the festivals? I always advise them to go at the speed of the slowest family member, the person usually and it's interesting because I find sometimes it's actually the non-Jewish person that actually is excited about taking on some of these
than I am.
Yeah, and so I wanted to ask Paul. I was kind of
Not in his
curious
DNA.
when you came to Beth Yeshua and you saw what Carol obviously has her own unique wrestle, but what was it like for you to come to Beth Yeshua?
what was it like for me?
Yeah. I mean, you had been to a Messianic fellowship in Israel, but that had maybe been some years ago. You'd basically been within the church for a long time. Was it a shock? Was it difficult? Was it exciting? What was it like?
It was different. The Messianic fellowship that I had attended in Jerusalem is, I would say, a little bit more like you would see a church service. They do Parashat Shavua, where they read the weekly portion from the Torah and talk about it. They do not have a physical Torah that they bring out. Rather, it's just reading from the Bible. And they don't have a liturgy. So there are things that I enjoy about a liturgy. I think that it encourages people not simply to sit in their seats, but to be part of the service, to be part of worshiping the Lord. Yes. And that there is a benefit to reciting every week the things that we believe in. So that I do like that very much. I enjoy being able to use my Hebrew.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. We enjoy that you can use your Hebrew.
That was something that had stagnated for many years, and it going back to Israel and then to Beth Yeshua encouraged me to reclaim the things that I'd lost in that area, and so I like that very much. Yeah.
What about in your home? How have you guys kind of worked out maybe what observances to do within the home? Like, are you guys lighting candles on a Friday night? How do you set apart Shabbat? Like, what kinds of things have you decided on together?
I don't know that we've ever sat down and decided on things.
Okay.
We don't usually, go ahead.
No, it probably for me would be I'm more careful to observe Shabbat now than I was before. Not in this, we still drive our car, we do other things that Orthodox Judaism would prohibit, but I also am careful not to do any of my regular work. I don't check work emails or anything like that on Shabbat. And I think that it's honoring to the Lord. I think that it's something that is right for me to do. So, but other than that, I don't know that there's a whole lot that we have changed.
We do light the candles for Hanukkah. We have a lot of Jewish decorations in our home. We have a mezuzah on our door. I think people would know if they walked in that, in fact, it was kind of funny, my sister that died, her son was visiting us, and it was kind of when we were just sort of I was figuring things out, and he walks in and he goes, "Wow, who's Jewish? Is Paul Jewish?" And I said, "No, but you are." And
Great.
he said, "Well, that's weird because I got matched to Rolf Sternglantz, who I think I told you about him. We always thought he was a Nazi, turned out to be a Jew. But anyway, I won't go there. But at any rate, that's a long story. But anyway, he got matched to him DNA when he did Family Search or one of those things, and it said Jewish. And so he's like, oh. And so then I was sharing with him a little bit about his family and why I said that. But at any rate, so I think people would know that there's something Jewish going on if they come in. You know, we have a menorah. We have a lot of Israeli art and things. My sister and I last year celebrated Hanukkah together. Each night we lit the candle and said the blessings. She went to Israel with us the last time we went, and she's starting to figure out what that means to her. She's not even sure, I think what it means to be a believer in Yeshua, but so the whole thing is a little bit, but she definitely wants to understand what being Jewish is, because she and I had several emails where she's like, no, we're not. And I said, well, we went to Poland, we went to Auschwitz, and she went with us, and she read the Who's Jewish for Execution Purposes, and I remember she started to cry, and
Right.
and she understood that she really was
Right.
Jewish. So, and I think we celebrate the festivals. Usually through Beth Yeshua, like Pesach, and that we'd love to go to Israel for Pesach sometime.
Wouldn't that be something?
That
Wow.
would probably be a fun, but interesting time. So I think it's, and I do agree about Shabbat. And I think we try to practice. I joke about the mitzvahs, but I do think I'm more aware of responsibility in that area to try to repair.
Kunolam.
Kunolam, yeah.
Yeah, and definitely be more faithful about honoring Shabbat.
Yeah. So it sounds like an interesting mix of Torah and Tanakh and really wrestling through the commandments of God, which I imagine being in a church for a long time, as you said, you didn't even really study the Old Testament much. It wasn't part of what you were even looking at maybe each week in sermons and other things. So wrestling through that and maybe realizing some of these are irrevocable gifts given to the Jewish people that are supposed to be celebrated, and as far as I know, even after the Messiah returns, we're going to be celebrating some of these. So that for sure is a big wrestle. And then also there's cultural things too, the just the idea of having Jewish art and other things in your home so that it's a recognizable Jewish place when people come to visit. I'm wondering what that's like for you as far as Aliyah, because that was a wrestle for me also. That was why my family, when we put in our paperwork for Aliyah, is because we also began really taking seriously the commandments that we were supposed to be living in the land, that living outside of the land is actually a curse. It's not a good thing. And then it's really hard if you are a believer, because right now certainly the Misrat Hapanim and everything is really firmly established against allowing believers in. But I'm curious, because you said that was also another sort of Holy Spirit moment. You started feeling some emotion about Aliyah. Is that something that you've paused until things are different politically, or?
I started the application, and I'm very lucky and fortunate that that Paul supports that. That he would go, some people, I asked a member of our assembly about their thought, and they said they'd go in a heartbeat, but their spouse would not. And so they probably wouldn't. I'm very fortunate that I know Paul would go if we were accepted. We did pause it because, several things. Paul's mother was ill and the political situation. Although it's funny, we're friends with an Orthodox gentleman there. He's been our guide and just a dear friend. And he asked me one time about Aliyah and I said, I didn't think, he knows that he knows I'm Messianic, he knows Carolyn's Messianic, he knows Paul's a believer. And I said, I didn't think politically that it would be, a good time to do it. And he said, oh no, he said, go to the remote area, put in your paperwork. So he was surprisingly helpful and supportive of our doing that. I also feel right now with the war, we're old, and I've wondered what one of the things the rabbi in the congregation where my dad's family did attend in Oregon, and where the family's buried, he said, one of the things he said was, what can you contribute to Israel if you make Aliyah? Because, you have to have a letter from a rabbi, etc. And no offense, but one from a Messianic rabbi probably isn't going to be helpful.
No, I know too well.
Yeah. So that was one of the things I've thought a lot about, is what can we contribute? Since my background's in counseling and social work and law, I think the counseling and social work part could be helpful in a time of war. But
Absolutely.
We're old people, and Paul has a lot of medical issues, so we don't want to burden their system if we can't really contribute right now. So I would say it's on pause, both for political, but also I don't want to be a burden to them right now. We would want to go and be able to serve and be helpful. Because one of the things I think the rabbi was concerned about was, because he said, you're not, he asked a funny question about finances, like, well, are you looking for financials? Because I guess some people go to Israel because they need money, and you get a lot of them. So I assured him we were not in a financial situation where we would expect them to take care of us. But medically and practically, we're old. I'm old. And whether we would be contributing right now is a hesitation on my part to finishing the application. Plus the Messianic issue. I just am not sure.
It is hard still. We went to a remote part.
You did?
Yes. Yeah. We had a letter from the rabbi that had buried Rosemary's grandmother in the Orthodox cemetery. We had all the documents. We had the rabbi who had married my grandmother and grandfather. We had a letter from him. We had their wedding certificate. We had plenty. But they Googled and found out we were believers. We've been active ministry for a long time, and so it was not hard. And so immediately we were blocked, even though we tried to do what were the current recommendations at the time. I know now that there are organizations like the JIJ that are very active in helping people who are typically discriminated against get their Aliyah status, and so that seems to be the way to go. They're very diligent and excellent at what they do. But yeah, it is a difficult, at best, situation for believers, just in general. And then Israel is a hard place to live. We went there, and part of it was I felt at home, but part of it was I have a lot of little kids, and I was looking around and thinking, oh, man, what am I going to do? I have a master's degree in secondary education, and teachers don't get paid well in Israel. So, how are we going to survive? Rosemary would probably make a lot more money as a dietitian. So, I'd probably stay at home, and she'd have to, go and take some serious classes in Hebrew, including the medical ones, to actually be able to practice. And so it's really, I understand that. And that's, I think, a really astute question by the rabbi, too, of what do you have to give? This is a nation that's surrounded by enemies. It's a nation that is going through great hardship.
Needs
often.
productive people.
Right, and it needs productive people.
Well,
it's interesting because, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I understand that. I understand the wanting to be a contributor and want to do things. That's who I am too. I want to be a contributor. I want to do those things, but if you do something, Carol and Paul, that blesses you in your spirit, it blesses God. For you just to be somebody's neighbor in Israel blesses God and blesses the people and blesses the country. Everybody is aging. Everybody is aging. You have no idea what you contribute just being who you are. And don't get into what the world says about, am I going to run a factory, or am I going to, do this or that? And do I have health conditions? Everybody has health conditions, varying degrees. But you need to do what God speaks to your heart. I'm not trying to get you guys to leave at all, at all. But at the same time, whatever blesses you in your spiritual self blesses God. And as Paul said earlier in this broadcast, God wants all Jews back to the land. Where was that? Is that Ezekiel? Where many times, just his goal is to get the Jews out of the diaspora and bring them home. And as you said, when you got there, you were home. You felt at home. It's okay to go home. Just put that in there too.
That's good. Well, I really appreciate you guys sharing your story. And as I told you before we started recording, I'd love to have you back.
Yes.
And just talk about your experience in Beth Yeshua. One of the things that I'm really committed to as a leader is I want to know the good and the bad and the ugly about what's working for our community and what isn't. And I know that there are some things that you would love to see different at Beth Yeshua and some things that you love that you shared about today. But I think those conversations are really important too. I am concerned for the future of Messianic Judaism in the United States, kind of on two fronts. One is that we don't seem to have clarity of identity, and then that really clouds what we're doing as a movement. Like, what is our purpose, our reason for existing, other than being maybe a Jewish flavored church or a synagogue that has Yeshua. So what are we doing beyond that? But then a lot of Jewish life right now, especially in the United States, is intermarried families. And we are not attracting a lot of intermarried families. I mean, just in general, Beth Yeshua doesn't attract a lot of Jewish people. You know, we primarily attract people that aren't Jewish, but are interested in Messianic Judaism, or they Googled it, or they have a favorite rabbi online, or whatever. And so I would love to have you guys back for another conversation of like, okay, you know, just from your experience, through your lens, what are the things that as you came into the community were kind of maybe disorienting but ended up being good? Maybe the things that you're like, wow, we've been here for a bit, and this, what is this all about? You know, we can have those conversations. Because I think that, well, I mean, for me, one of the goals of this podcast is growth. Like, you have to intentionally look at the things maybe that are broken and the things that are good and decide where you're going to move forward, right? So it's good for the elders. I know the elders listen to this podcast, and I think it's good for us to be aware and start having conversations and begin praying about God's vision for our community. And I don't need for us to be a certain size in order for us to feel successful. But I want to know that we're really meeting the needs of the Jewish and the intermarried families that are part of our community. I want them to thrive, you know, and that's really important. So,
well, and there are only a handful of families that are both Jews. Most of our people are intermarrieds.
Oh, for sure.
Where all the Jewish people at Beth Yeshua are, most of them, I would say like 8 or 9 out of 10 are intermarried families.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
That means something. But they're there because it's a Jewish space. But at the same time, how do we not alienate? In fact, just the opposite. How do we draw in that non-Jewish person in a way that is healing and for them and for their whole family, without negating who we are? I mean, that's, you know, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot to wrestle through, I think, even more for the younger generation, because the
Absolutely.
younger generation is raised with like a lot of inclusivity, and let's embrace all the parts of who we are as a couple, and let's transmit all of that on to the next generation. And how do you do that while also acknowledging that being Jewish has some specific calls in Torah? Like, there are some specific things that Jewish people have to wrestle with that it would seem that the nations do not. And so that's part of the balance, man, and it is hard. So anyways, we'd love to have you guys back. Thank you so much for sharing your history and your
Edit
stories.
some of it.
Yeah.
I love the dog part.
We'll edit a little bit of Sunday barking, but that was also when you were kind of sharing about your experience with your sister, and so I don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
That was really powerful. So All right. As always, everybody out in podcast land, thank you for listening. If you want to watch this, you can go to YouTube and look for Beth Yeshua Sac or Sacramento. And our website is bethyeshua.org. So thank you, Chrismans. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us. Thank you, Bubby. Appreciate you.
See you tomorrow.
All right. Shabbat Shalom. Yep.
Shabbat
See you tomorrow.
Shalom.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can always visit bethyeshua.org for more.